Everyone has one, a holy grail, a video game that is, price-wise, always just a little out of reach. Your Earthbounds, Suikoden 2s, Panzer Dragoon Sagas, and of course, Nintendo World Championship gold carts. Long before people were clearly money laundering graded copies of Mario 64 on eBay, it was relatively easy to find obscurities and I guess rarities in stores. That's probably because all of the GameStops, FuncoLands, and EB Games were filled with kids throwing copies of Chrono Trigger, Gotcha Force, and other things into the trade-in wall for $3 credit towards the latest Pokemon. Were we smart? No, but we felt like it. A mistake? Absolutely. I sold GigaWing 2 for $20 back in 2008, and I'm a fool. Back then, when the PlayStation 3 was out, I remember buying copies of like Lunar 2 or even Bomberman 64 The Second Attack for like sub 20. The early 2000s were a great time for game collection. Well, it's 2022 now. The retro game market is not great. Things that were designed to be played are now being resold for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a pop. If you ask me, it's kind of a huge problem, but you know, supply and demand. There are countless games out there that have gotten a single small print and now sit around as collectibles. They're extremely rare and go for several hundreds, and they have never and will never be ported due to a mix of weird red tape, dead IPs, and lost code. As much as I know, a lot of us would love to have a copy of, say, Def Jam Fight for New York to play. It's just hard to justify $130 for a loose disc. Thankfully, we got the internet, the last bastion of preservation of video gaming trademark. If no one's gonna re-release or port this thing, by all means, boot up RetroArch with legally acquired BIOS files and let it rip.
So yo, it's Austin, and today I want to talk about the unobtainable. If you were to ask me several years ago to talk about like Persona Revelations, I would have been like, I want to make sure I have like the proper discs so I can play it on real hardware, and well, yeah, not anymore. The second these things supersede their original value, they stop being video games and become collector's items, even if they suck, like Persona Revelations. We're gonna be talking about rarities, obscurities, and good games from as many generations as we can, but first, let's grab a snack and talk about today's sponsor, Monk Pack. You need a quick bite? Monk Pack's got your back. Monk Pack offers low-sugar, keto-friendly bars that are also non-GMO, plant-based, and gluten-free. Nutrition? We got it. Good flavors? Got it. I'm sure we've all had one heck of a year with a lot of staying inside and junk food. And something like Monk Pack's been helpful in like reducing my sugar intake without sacrificing taste, which is kind of a win-win. I like the sea salt dark chocolate personally. Now, anything dark chocolate's good, but these have like a nice soft and chewy texture to it. It reminds me of the sugary snacks I used to have as a kid that were like, you know, crazy in sugar and calorie amount, but you know, without all the guilt. It's nice. Each one of these contains 1 gram of sugar or less, 2 to 3 grams of net carbs, and 150 calories or less. So even if you're not looking for something keto, it's perfect for that midday bite or even a guilt-free decadent dessert. Also, it just tastes good. I'll be keeping these around for sure. So hey, go on over to monkpack.com and save yourself 20% on your first purchase of any Monk Pack product by using the code Eruption at checkout or just clicking the link in the description. Plus, if you give these a try and you aren't satisfied, Monk Pack has a 100% happiness guarantee, so you can exchange them for something else or get your money back. That's monkpack.com and use the code Eruption for 20% off your first purchase today. Shout out to Monk Pack for sponsoring today's video, but for now, video games. When it comes to video game rarity and values and prices, I'm sure there's a couple things that come to your brain, but you probably don't think of Sonic the Hedgehog. After all, Sega's ported nearly every single one of his adventures like multiple times, so they're not that hard to get. Well, you should be thinking of Sonic, and for that, we have to go all the way back to his first adventure.
Well, kinda. The original Sonic the Hedgehog was a landmark for platformers and single-handedly helped Sega spark the 90s console war. Yeah, the one that created all of the tribalism and gaming communities that we're still reeling from to this day. Is there a possibility that I'm a post-hypnotic Sega sleeper agent ready to be reactivated the second a Dreamcast 2 is announced? It's more likely than you think. Well, it's not Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Genesis that's super rare these days. While it's gone up in price due to collectors, sure, it's got nothing on the Sega Master System version. Yeah, there's an official 8-bit Sonic, one whose price took an elevator straight into the stratosphere sometime in the late 2010s. Anyone got a spare $600? The game is actually really freaking cool. Developed around the same time for both the Master System and Game Gear, this version of Sonic the Hedgehog almost feels like a demake. Coming out a solid 3 months after the Genesis one, this was instead developed by Ancient Corp. Yeah, my boy Yuzo Koshiro's company. It's also their first game, right before hits like Streets of Rage 2 and ActRaiser 2, so yeah, that's kind of a power trilogy right out of the gate. Sonic on the Master System doesn't feel like a demake though, it feels like a real Sonic game, and in some ways is actually a bit more cohesive than the original. A lot of the stages have really tight level design, the speed isn't quite blast processing levels, but Sonic still runs real quick. There are a few differences though. Green Hill, Labyrinth, and Scrap Brain are still there, although they have slightly different layouts. There's also auto-scrolling sections similar to Mario 3, and they actually work well enough. New though are Bridge, Jungle, and Skybase Zone. All new levels with new songs, new bosses, and themes. It's not perfect, and it still has a bit of that Sonic jank with the geometry from time to time, but this is really impressive for an 8-bit game. With the exception of Labyrinth Zone, it ain't great in the Genesis version, and it ain't great here. What about a vertical scrolling level? Well, Jungle Act 2 is for you. It's weird, I know. There's no Super Sonic like in the original, but collecting all the Chaos Emeralds will give you a slightly different ending. You know, with Sega being usually really reliable with their re-releases and collections of older games, I'm genuinely surprised that we haven't seen this one recently. Granted, the Game Gear version can be found in the Mega Collection Plus, and this one was ported to the Wii Shop Virtual Console in 2008. But can't do that anymore. Surprisingly, there's also a totally separate Sega Master System Sonic the Hedgehog 2, one that I played a bunch, but that one is significantly cheaper. I'd be willing to bet that a lot of Sonic fans out there haven't played this Master System version or even any of the several Game Gear ones, and they should. Just stick to emulation.
Oh, Sonic, you know him well, but it's not very often that you find a game character or franchise with an entry that's that expensive. It's way more likely that you'll walk into one of these retro stores, see something in a glass case selling for $500 that you've never heard of. You might not even recognize the case. For example, have you ever seen a boxed Atari Jaguar game?
I have just once, and it was a copy of Troy Aikman NFL Football. We've only ever covered a single Jaguar game on this YouTube channel, and it was Trevor McFur and the Crescent Galaxy. What that says, I'm not sure, but still to this day, I've never gotten my hands on an actual Atari Jaguar, which I guess makes sense considering it was one of the largest console flops of all time, causing Atari to flee the console market. All I'm saying is that when your most successful game, Alien vs. Predator, doesn't even sell 100,000 copies, well, for one thing, it's gonna make the cost of the entire library go up. It's just, with the exception of like Breakout 2000, AVP, and like 4 other games, most of them aren't worth talking about. So yeah, if you're wanting to go out there and spend over $400 on a boxed copy of Atari Karts, be my guest. This game is weirdly creepy. It's quite literally a Super Mario Kart clone from like head to toe. The entire presentation screams, we played that one game. But since Atari doesn't have memorable mascot characters or a world to pull things from, they're like, how about we make up one of our own? So we've got the Devil, Cthulhu, whatever this is. Yeah, it's like the dollar store brand version of a kart racer. Weirdly, the developer, Miracle Design, will go on to make more of these racing games, including the notoriously awful Rascal Racers, so do with that info what you will. But how about an obscure game from a much more famous developer? Let's go back to Sega. Spoilers, I talk about Sega a lot. In the mid-90s, and also for 40 years around that, Sega was well known for their high-quality arcade games. Outrun, Space Harrier, Virtua Fighter, you name it. If you ever see me standing next to a Virtual On cabinet, we're gonna play it. Well, they released 2 dope static light gun games around that time, LA Machine Guns and Gunblade New York, the latter of which was a super ahead of its time on-rail shooter where you're flying around in a helicopter unloading on various criminals and terrorists in a helicopter, all while enjoying some of that massive light gun kickback. Seriously, the rumble on this thing was wild. Same thing with its sequel, LA Machine Guns Rage of the Machines, which is, I guess, the opposite of what Zach De La Rocha's little band was talking about. What can I say? They're on-rail shooters. Fun and goofy ones that take you all over the place, don't have much continuity, don't really care, and just have you shooting giant robots. The 90s were wild. These 2 games were seemingly destined to be left in random arcade malls for their entire existence, but out of what must have been been a weird miracle, were compiled together onto a disc for the Wii. Gunblade in New York and Alley Machine Guns Arcade Hits Pack. 2 immensely fun arcade first-person shooters now with a Wiimote. 2 games that can be beaten in about 30 minutes a pop. In fact, this was released as a budget game at the time, about $30, but now about $100. Woo! I love that the cover of this game has the 2 actual arcade cabinets on it, like it's taunting you. You could be holding this, but no, hold this instead. Freaking Wiimotes. Still, it's totally serviceable. You're still bound to get the same amount of motion sickness that you would get in a smelly bowling alley arcade, but even in your quiet home in front of your little TV, you still won't be able to hear the music over the barrage of gunfire.
There's countless levels of obscure rarities, and pretty much everything going forward is going to have that level of weirdness to it. However, it wouldn't be a video of mine unless we were talking about some licensed games. After all, who else is going to be talking about Brazilian exclusive Sega Master System games? Yeah, 2 Master System entries in one day is a lot. X-Men Mojo World.
You know, after that superhero fan gene skipped me as a kid, I found myself all over everything X-Men related these days. The newer 2019 Hickman run has me craving more and more as I'm slowly losing it. However, even as a child, I had an appreciation for Professor X and his children, especially Rogue and Gambit. Gambit's my boy. Not surprisingly, most video games with the word X-Men in the title go for a decent price, even if they aren't too rare. You can find a copy of the dope Origins Wolverine on PlayStation 3 for like $40, and that's surprising. Generally, the rarest X-Men game out there is them versus Street Fighter, and while I love that game, it's significantly more attainable than X-Men Mojo World. What a title screen. So this hit the States on the Game Gear, and in Brazil only the Master System, since that was relatively easy to do. The weird part is that it came out all the way in 1996. That's not just late for the Genesis, that's late for the Game Gear and Master System. This is apparently one of the very last games to be released on that battery-sucking portable at a time when you could be playing Resident Evil, Super Mario 64, and more to the point, X-Men Children of the Atom. Mojo World is strange because it, alongside all the other Master System X-Men games, are basically scaled-down versions of the Sega Genesis X-Men game. They feel very similar, have a lot of the same characters, and even the same pace of movement. Although the Master System version feels a lot worse in every way. I love how character select isn't obvious. You're just sitting on a screen that says whatever level you're on, and in order to change it, you have to walk to the right, and to go forward, you have to press A and B at the same time. You gotta love it. I don't know why you would play as anyone but Rogue anyway. Not only is she peak 90s animation design, she's peak Capcom art design and can do this. How do you beat that? I imagine that the people who still only had a Game Gear or Master System in 1996 were more than happy with this, but it's a really confusing level design and an extremely short runtime just weren't worth the money. Yeah, not even when you get a killer game-winning screen like this. I hope you're ready to spend $240. Just try not to die, otherwise you'll be face to face with this.
All right, enough Master System. There's actually like enough games on that console for me to dip my theoretical tortilla chip in every few years, so we'll do that over time. But for now, let's talk about licensed games on other consoles, like the Nintendo Entertainment System.
It boggles my mind that one of the rarest and most sought-after Nintendo Entertainment System games is a Flintstones one, with Surprise at Dinosaur Peak now going for literally well over $3,000. A price I simply ask no one pay, even though it's pretty good. Speaking of dinosaurs, we've got Jurassic Park on the Sega Master System. Jurassic Park Operation Genesis for the Xbox. The original Thick Boy Xbox doesn't have too many rare or expensive games unless your name is like Outrun 2006 or Steel Battalion, but Operation Genesis has always held its own in the upper area. Sure, it's not as good as Jurassic World Evolution these days, but having a console version of what was essentially Zoo Tycoon with guest-devouring dinosaurs was and is really neat. I had a lot of fun with this one when I was younger, and it's actually gone down in price in recent times, but when I was collecting these original Xbox games, they used to sit in the 120s. However, something that's only gone up in price is Futurama for the PlayStation 2, a game that was released under very unfortunate circumstances, and by that I mean it came out 2 days after the last episode of the show did when it was canceled. These days, a copy of this thing's been peaking in the higher 200s, as much as 260 for a box copy, and that's wild, especially because the game itself is very mid. In Futurama the game, you play as Fry, Leela, Bender, and Zoidberg as you, well, participate in than your average episode of Futurama. I've always enjoyed the show as a more over-the-top take on the same humor as The Simpsons, but Futurama has always been a bit edgier. Not Family Guy edgy, but still, let's just say there's no suicide booths in The Simpsons, especially none that you can use in-game. But what we do get is a total 6.5 out of 10 licensed romp with an emphasis on gunplay and weirdly specific platforming. Seriously, it's ridiculously tight for no reason. Look how small these ledges are. It's certainly no Simpsons hit and run, and it definitely lacks the polish of something like that. There's a lot of weird camera issues, and while it's trying to take off of something like Ratchet and Clank, sometimes the shooting feels off. You also tend to get destroyed really fast because enemies are relentless. Thankfully, you got a lot of lives and the game has a lot of leniency, so it's not awful, but it definitely has a little bit of that jank going on. Though I will say, the opening of the Futurama theme is perfect for level complete. The game itself is fine, but the important thing here is the fact that it's literally an episode of the show, or as they call it, The Lost Adventure. After this was released and Futurama was revived in 2007, they included all of the cutscenes from this game as a movie on the DVD for Futurama Bender's Big Score. However, since the original developer, Unique Development Studios, what a solid name, went out of business following this, they ended up putting the cutscenes together by recording the Xbox version. It's wild. Futurama the game is an example of having an IP with infinite potential. They could literally do anything considering the world is, well, the infinite universe. But it is indeed a PlayStation 2 action platformer, and if you like those, like me, you'll probably enjoy this anyways. Even with all of the meta, hey, I'm in a video game references.
Uh-oh, it's a mine level. These things are a mama.
Futurama is one of those games that's rare, but at the end of the day is just totally fine. There's a lot of those, and still to this day I'm wondering why anyone would spend $400 on a copy of Devil's Third. A port? Probably not. Enough with mid though, I want to talk about hidden gems, and what better way to start that than talking about a guy that's so small you might have missed him in the first place, Chibi Robo.
I totally missed this game growing up. I'm not really sure why, as I was a big platformer guy, but when Chibi Robo came out in 2006, it didn't really knock sales out of the park. I'm sure if you're thinking about rare GameCube games, you might automatically think about something like Cubivore, but I wanted to save that one for a different topic, even though it's sitting in the $600 range these days. Chibi Robo is a quirky and charming adventure platformer developed by Skip Limited, a group that may or may not be defunct these days. Despite this, they were responsible for a lot of cute GameCube and Wii era games that you might have totally missed, like this, Captain Rainbow, and Gift Pia, which makes sense considering most of those never left Japan. What you do have is a game that exudes soul. You play as, well, Chibi Robo, a toy bought by a toy collector who spends too much money on figures. I'm sure we all have a few people like that in our life, looks in the mirror. But Chibi Robo here is not a static statue of Tifa Lockhart, it's a little man who helps around the house. And well, that's the game. Run around, do chores, and be a helpful little guy. While this was originally conceived to be a point-and-click adventure game, at some point Shigeru Miyamoto decided, hey, let's make this a whole thing. No jumping though, it's done Zelda style. Since you control a robot, you have a little meter on the bottom that acts as not just a currency for powering electronics in the house, but also your health. There's puzzles where you'll be moving things around or using battery draining abilities, and you have to make sure you're plenty charged up. Chibi Robo is weird as heck and oddly ahead of its time. As you're running around the house, there's also a day and night cycle, which will influence which of the family members is up and at 'em. At night, other toys come to life with their various ridiculous personalities. Also, there's aliens, because why not? It's got the same goofy premise and feel that something like Katamari Damacy has, and while it's not as over-the-top eccentric as that, it has its own thing going on that's enjoyable enough for anyone. I love the use of sound effects here. Anytime you take a step or do certain abilities, there's a musical sound cue for it. There's no footsteps here, baby. And don't forget the voiced gibberish. This game's oddly pleasant on the ears. You better just be prepared to shell out over $250 USD for a boxed copy. How about Hagane, the final conflict? Boot up the emulators, cause he was not picking up one of these anytime soon. Years ago, I remember seeing this one for $200, but after this pandemic retro game market inflation time skip, I guess anything's possible. Hagane is, bluntly put, what if Shinobi, but Super Nintendo, with a little sprinkle of the Strider spice. Developed by CA Production, a Japanese contract developer, they've had a hand in developing a few games here and there throughout the years. There's not much known about them, but they are listed as a co-developer on most Mario parties. Hagane was their first game, and it whips ass, Winamp style.
Really whips the llama's ass.
What did that even mean? It's simple. You're a future ninja cyborg fighting other future ninjas and samurais. You go through ridiculously cool looking levels that embody that dark 90s take on the future, like Akira's retrofuturism. Tubes, cables, and unique looking tech everywhere. You go level to level, beating the crap out of everything, hanging and bouncing off walls, riding jet bikes, and I suppose, saving the world in the final conflict. Not much to say about this one besides the fact that it rules and it's extremely hard to find and deserves so much more. It is a crying shame that this thing's never been ported anywhere, not even on the Wii Virtual Console. It was published by Hudson in the States, but by a group called Red Company, who's rebranded and sold to multiple publishers and corporations throughout the years, so who knows where the rights are to this, but dang if it ain't a good time.
So if you're one of those freaks who loves wasting money and wants to spend $3,000 on a boxed copy of Hagane, emulated, and instead drop that on a charity or something, like the one I did just a couple days ago. Still going for another 25 days. I pinned it in the comments if you want to help a good cause. One more hidden gem, but we need to talk about Star Fox. There's really nothing out there like Star Fox, especially 64. You might have something kind of close like Ace Combat or Afterburner, but nothing really got close. That was until I played Vanark.
Vanark for the PlayStation 1 is one of the coolest games that I know you haven't played. Star Fox 64 is a very specific game, one that's not been replicated much, if at all, and one that I think anyone would have a hard time topping, including Nintendo themselves, considering nothing's come close and they just keep remaking and rebooting it. I sure hope that Star Fox Zero is not the last one. Vanark is about as close to this as I've ever seen. You go mission to mission, usually in a straight line, shooting all kinds of things as they come close to you. It's got a bumpin' soundtrack, has a lot of the on-rail shooter drama you would expect, and all of the massive bosses with very specific weak points that you could shake a stick at. As a bonus in this though, you got a quasi-Resident Evil looking method for downtime between the heart-pumping action missions. You control a dude named Shun, who is the lead pilot on the MDF, the Mars Defense Force. Your mission is to, well, protect Mars, all with the help of your trusty Robo buddy and various crewmates. There's a lot of potential for personality and characters here, but unfortunately, despite this being on a CD-ROM, there's a total lack of any voice acting, making it lose a lot of that. You've also got no say in the routes that you go, as there's only 6 levels that are as linear as can be. You do get to pick your weapon loadouts per mission, and there is one on a cool jet bike, but that's about it. Star Fox 64 was extremely ahead of the time, with its constant one-liners, choose-your-own-adventure style progression, and multiple completely different levels and routes. You can play that game 10 times and still not know how to unlock the specific warp zones or how to get the Zonus on hard. Vanark is a one-and-done kind of experience with a few difficulty sliders, but honestly, it's kind of unfair to compare it to the best this genre has to offer. Vanark is one heck of a hidden gem on the PlayStation 1, and I'm lucky to have it, especially now that it's approaching the 150 zone. This one's totally worth a download and an hour of your time.
So in the 90s and early 2000s, it was kind of hard to tell what was going to be worth money and what wasn't, but there was always one American video game publisher that put so much effort into their packaging and had such a high quality of standard for what they were putting out there that you knew it was going to be worth something. If you're a fan of JRPGs at all, then you probably already know what I'm talking about. Working Designs.
Controversial, I know. Working Designs was a video game publisher whose whole shtick was basically bringing over the things that no one else would. They were one of the only groups that were going out there and localizing Japanese cult hits that the industry was leaving behind. They were notorious for going above and beyond with their packaging, making big collector's boxes with ridiculous amount of items, or even printing multiple variants of discs for each thing that they threw out there. Ever since I was young, games with that Working Designs logo were harder to find and worth their full price, or nowadays, way more. Was I that dumb kid bringing his complete Lunar 2 inbox to the middle school cafeteria just to show the little omake pieces? Absolutely. I was very smart. Working Designs got their start on the TurboGrafx 16 and Sega CD with games like Cosmic Fantasy II and Lunar the Silver Star, but the one that caught my eye from the time was Popful Mail. Gee, I wonder why. This came out in 1995, and I never owned a Sega CD as a kid though, so it sat on the shelves with me eternally wondering why, until recently. And I gotta say, this game's pretty cool. It's a more overtly anime version of something like Wonder Boy and Monster World, and that kind of 2D RPG light adventure was, and still is, 100% up my alley. It's a remake of an old Japanese game that got several different versions, but the Sega CD one is the only one that made it outside of Japan. But it's that Working Designs touch that's unforgettable.
Hey, you are really funny, girl. You make me laugh. Hey, you like a good joke? Ha! Boom!
Ah, yes. Ancient medieval American Italians.
Oh man, I biffed it.
The dub is pretty decent overall, especially for the mid-90s where there was just a lot of screaming, but unfortunately that does mean we lose Megumi Hayashibara as male, and she's great. Working Designs games were notorious for, I guess, over-localizing or Americanization. Well, at the time, as a kid, I appreciated my delicate American sensibilities being pandered to in a video game with references that even I could understand. A lot of the times, they weren't necessarily faithful. They'd also frequently tweak the difficulty in these games, usually tuning them to be way harder than the originals. Though I prefer this to the original case of Popful Mail being reworked to be a part of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. We could have had Sister Sonic. The game itself is enjoyable, although a tad archaic these days. There's no experience points or anything, and you'll get stronger by grinding for money and buying new weapons. There's multiple characters to play as: female bounty hunter Male, magician Tat, and dragon-looking thing Gaw. Each feel very different, but it's hard not to play favorites with Tat because he shoots big fireballs.
Oh, I abred when I should have cadavered.
It's a silly and lighthearted adventure that loved throwing a joke out every 10 seconds of dialogue, and there's a lot of voiceover here. There's a clear sign of a ton of love that Working Designs put in, and the overall experience is really enjoyable, even if they made some questionable changes.
You've arrived just in time to witness the manifestation of my mountainous manliness. So long, my flabby little foes.
All right, here we go. One more game for the video, and this one is my holy grail. It's the game that I don't think I'll ever get a copy of, which sucks, but you know, it is what it is. Keeping it Working Designs, keeping it Hidden Gem, heck, let's toss in Licensed Obscure, and of course Sega. I'm talking about Magic Knight Rayearth for the Sega Saturn.
The Saturn might be cheating. Considering how much of a bomb it was in the States, just about every single notable game on the console goes for a crazy price these days. And double that if you're Working Designs. Dragon Force, Sega Ages, Shining Wisdom, Albert Odyssey. These were like a power hour of games that weren't gonna sell well, but were also really cool. Everyone should play Dragon Force, but this is about Magic Knight Rayearth. Us weeb boomers know it, of course, but Magic Knight Rayearth was one of famed all-female manga group Clamp's first major works. They've always had great success with their manga being turned into popular anime like X, Cardcaptor Sakura, Angelic Layer, Tsubasa, and Chobits. But their take on the magical girl genre with Magic Knight Rayearth was something that always stood out to me. Gee, I wonder why. Big robots, big swords, let's go. Magical girl mecha hybrid, yep. Don't even care that it's a shoujo, and neither should you. Rayearth would get a few Japanese-only video games like a Super Nintendo turn-based RPG and even a special edition Game Gear. This franchise was relatively popular, in Japan anyways. In the States, despite having a lot of popularity with VHS peoples and being on a few random channels, it never had that Toonami run that it deserved. It was apparently gonna be on Fox Kids, all Americanized, but never quite made it. They even made an opening. Well, thankfully that didn't happen. Magic Knight got a way better than expected dub and hit cult status, but that'd be in 1999. Working Designs, being the crazy wizards that they were, decided to localize the video game for the Saturn in 1998, 3 years after it came out in Japan as the last video game to be released for the console. Yeah, legit, this was it. No Sega nothing between this and the Dreamcast.
And guess who got a copy? Of the Japanese version. This here's Magic Knight Rayearth, and it's everything that I wanted it to be. Now, I got the Japanese version because when I was there, it was like 30 bucks, and also because I don't want to spend $1,000 on something that may or may not have disc rot. No thank you.
Magic Knight Rayearth is a Zelda-like that follows the plot of the anime, and I love it. Reviews from the time commended Working Design's efforts to bring this stateside, but all backhandedly were like, yeah, it looks old now though, in an era when Final Fantasy VII was out over a year. But if you ask me, Rayearth's sprite art looks so clean and lovely. The visuals have this cozy feel to them that's timeless, and the gameplay is pretty good. You can switch between the three girls, Hikaru, Umi, and Fu, as you go through a linear action RPG adventure to save the world of Sephiroth. It's a very charming game that follows the plot of the show real closely while filling in a couple gaps. The girls get more powers, weapons, and you find power-ups for your health and magic. They each have different castable abilities, some fireballs, some healing. There's hidden items to be found, and plenty of silly 90s localization dialogue, like this.
The time has come for a little child abuse.
Oh my god.
My pleasures they got.
What was wrong with us? Unfortunately, Magic Knight Re-Earth was a little too late for the Saturn in the States, obviously. It was announced really early in Japan too, which makes it even more wacky. But it shows that Working Designs was committed long-term to bringing this over here. And I'm glad they did, even though they tweaked it to be way more difficult than the original for no reason. I assume that it's partly due to the fact that the source code for the original was lost due to a hard drive crashing, so they had to rebuild a lot of it for the US release. I didn't find the bosses too hard, but a lot of the enemies are huge sponges. We talk a lot about licensed video games here, and I think Magic Knight Re-Earth sits on top with the best of them. Partially because it's got a robot shoot 'em up section. Who doesn't love that? I still hope that one day the price comes down, there's a random digital re-release, or I'm fortunate enough to stumble upon a copy of this game within my means. But it's nice to know that the holy grail I've wanted to play all this time is pretty awesome. Thank you, Sega Saturn Emulation. You finally got better.
Well, that's all for today. Rare and expensive games that you'll probably never own. As time moves on and resellers and collectors are out there doing their thing, the idea of owning something like the US copy of Magic Knight Re-Earth or Hagane seems more and more like a distant dream, which sucks, but unfortunately that seems to be the way things are. I'm still hoping that I'm in a fever dream currently and I wake up and it's like 20% of the value. Like that would be cool. I know we all got holy grails and I'm sure there's a bunch that I've literally never heard of, so please drop them down in the comments because I'm probably gonna go check them out at some point. There's a lot of games I can cover. I like gaming's fun. Anyways, I've been Austin and join me next time for real for the anti-holy grail, Metal Gear Survive.
Thanks for watching. Just so everybody knows, we hit our goal with the charity stream for the Trevor Project, and if you missed it and want to contribute a little bit, I'll drop the link in the description. It's going for like another 24 days, so hop on that if you want. Special Patreon shout out to Blackfoot Ferret, Chris Shelton, Christopher Olivia, Darren Newton, Doug Prince, DX Buster, David Molnar, Elijah, GM Pinks, Hey Quiggles, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Kieran Arter, Nick Irving, P-Funk, Randall Bentley, Ryan Talbert, and Shazan. Thank you all so much for your generous support. Okay, for real, Metal Gear Survive, that's what's coming up next. I had a couple things I wanted to get done in the meantime, and it's taken a while because it is a long game to get into, but I know it'll be worth the wait. For now, I must depart. Love you, bye.